I think that it's becoming more and more challenging to be an owner or a property manager.
Hello and welcome to Pillars of Wealth Creation, where we talk about creating financial success with a special focus on business and real estate. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. Now, let's get to it. Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. With me, I'm excited to have Dana Dunford. Dana, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dana is the CEO of Hemlane, which is a venture-backed property management platform with over 28,000 rentals and $1 billion in payments processed. So we'll dive into what exactly Hemlane is, because that, maybe doesn't give quite the whole story behind Hemlane, but a pretty cool, tech company that real estate investors, so most of the listeners here could utilize. So she's a strong advocate of purchasing properties anywhere. The best investments, as I talk about, are not always in your backyard. So sometimes you got to go other places, and Hemlane helps you do that. So Dana, I want to introduce you by you telling us a story. You were the first woman to win a calf dressing championship belt buckle in the California rodeo. Can you explain to our listeners what that means?
Yeah, that is a embarrassing but comical story. So I'm so glad you asked that, Todd. For the listeners out there, one thing that attracts cowboys and cowgirls to the California rodeo is it has the largest purse size. And also, it has some fantastic belt buckles. So these are the really heavy, sturdy silver belt buckles that you would dream to own. And a fun fact about it that most don't know is if you are the top bull rider in the world or the top bronc rider or roper, you get the same belt buckle as you get for anyone doing any other competition in the California rodeo. So, being that it was in my hometown where I grew up, and I grew up on a ranch, I looked up what are the different various sports that you can sign up for. And one of them is called calf dressing. And what calf dressing is you go and you the cows are tied with ropes. So you go and you tackle the cow, and then you dress it in Wrangler jeans. Once you do,
Front and back, or just one?
just the back all the way up to
Just
the
the
top.
back.
And there's one judge per each group. It's a group of three.
Okay.
And so with each judge, they have to say you have the Wrangler jeans far enough
Far
up
enough
on
up.
the back,
Mm-hmm.
and then they give
Mm-hmm.
you the green light.
How do you know
Once
what size to get?
of the jeans.
Yeah, like are they, 32, 32? Are they, like, what do they wear?
Yeah, I don't think they want you to game the system, so they come with the Wrangler jeans. So you don't
Oh,
even have
gotcha.
to do any
You don't even
work.
have to buy them.
You don't even have to buy jeans. You just show up to this competition.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I did was I recruited two football players to join me, and they were city boys. They lived in the city. They're like, we don't understand this. I said, well, I need two partners for this, and I need ones who are fast and big. I said, I'll be the one to do the Wrangler jeans because my arms can fit in there with the cow's legs, but I need folks who can actually tackle a cow.
Yeah.
And so they were
Yeah.
like, okay, great, sign us up. So the three of us show up, and everyone kind of looks at us like this is a joke because all these cowboys are in boots, and some of them even had spurs on. I don't know why you would need spurs
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
calf dressing. But anyway, they all showed up in cowboy boots. We're there in sneakers, like running shoes, ready to go. And so the gun goes off, and we're just the first ones to get a cow, tackle it, first ones to get the jeans on. Judge goes like this, like you're clear, and we just go and sprint, grab the baton in the center for one, and we won it. And then we got the massive belt buckles. And
Mhm.
so, anyways, really cool. Only woman to ever join the competition. And I walked away with the same belt buckle that the top bull riders in the world get. So that was pretty cool accomplishment.
So the reason I love this story so much is because it's so unique, and you did something that is so outside. Because as you said before, what we jumped on, you didn't practice. Like this was your first time.
Yeah.
This was your first rodeo. You weren't practicing, and you just took this big kind of risk, and it was totally different outside of your comfort zone. And that to me is what people need to be doing. Just get outside of your comfort zone and do something
Yeah.
like that. Like that is totally outside of the norm for anybody to do. And you just go out there and do it, and you win a big belt buckle. Like just so cool. So cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you just have to have a little bit of strategy beforehand. Like everyone kind of looked at us like, hey, why is this girl joining? But it was one of those things where then you were watching these guys try to put the pants on and like they were running with the pants just holding them, whereas I already had my hands in the pants. But
Mm,
inside out. So I could just really quickly put them on the legs and push them up. And so we had already had our strategy down with it. And it was an advantage that I had, smaller arms to get my arms in there with the legs,
yeah.
which I think
Yeah.
the other cowboys didn't really think this stuff through. So
That's cool. Did you like watch any YouTube videos or anything on it?
no, I didn't. I just did it.
You just did it. That's great. Well, let's get to Hemlane. So why well, first I guess why what was the reason for wanting to build this company?
Yeah, great question. I probably like most property managers out there, you don't kind of dream to go into property management. No one wakes up when they're in kindergarten and says, "I want to be in property management."
Yeah, no.
Um, you do it out of need, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
property managers who say, "Hey, I saw there were really bad property managers in my area. I'm very
Mhm.
operationally efficient." And so for me, it came out of a need. So it started with my family having investments, and then I got into purchasing my own real estate as well. But those investments were all out of state. And we had gone through a fair share of property managers. And so my sister and brother-in-law basically came to me and said, "Hey, we're just going to take over the management and self-manage remotely." And that was interesting to me in the sense of like, oh, okay, how would you do it?
Yeah.
And through time, what I learned and then bought my own properties, never saw them and just started managing them remotely was that as long as you have a really good process in place and a really good team on the ground, you can do it. The problem out there was none of the tools were built for it. And that's why we call Hemlane a platform rather than a software, because I think when you want to change and innovate and when you start a company, you always need to think of how do I do something differently? Like if you say, "Hey, I'm going to be the next Appfolio, but more like cheaper, like more affordable,"
Yeah.
or "I'm going to be the next Appfolio, but with a better design," you're just kind of putting lipstick on
Yeah.
something that already existed. And so I think to
And
me,
that
like
has a
that's
reputation and
yes.
a ton of
Yeah,
users, and so you're trying to compete doing the exact same thing.
exact same
That's
thing.
tough.
And that's what they call a red ocean. A red ocean is where all the sharks are. You have
Yeah.
just so much competition. So that wasn't attractive to me, and especially landlord software. Landlord software is the worst. There's
Mm,
like 5 bazillion of them out there.
yeah.
They're all competing for the same customers. Their
Hmm.
customers have a very low willingness to pay because software doesn't solve your problems. Like
Hmm.
humans solve your problems. And maybe AI robots, we can talk about that too, but humans today. And so because of that, it was one of those things where I said, I don't want to just create another landlord software. That doesn't change anything. If anything, all the landlord softwares just get worse because there's more out there and they don't have the masses on there. So they're all trying to compete and they're all struggling. So I wanted to do something different. And what I saw was in property management, it's all or none. It's either, hey, you do everything yourself or you hire a traditional full service manager.
Right.
And for us, we said, why don't we do something different? Let's do something in the middle. Todd, you can pick and choose what you want to do. on Hemlane. And then we have the third party support, licensed folks to help with everything else, to either
Hmm,
be your boots on the ground or help if you're really bad at something like repair coordination, they'll help with that, etc.
interesting. How so? Because you don't have, do you guys have boots on the ground? You're not actually managing the property, like
No, so
physically managing.
yep, we don't physically manage it. So all decisions go back to the owner. But what you'll
Yeah.
hear from owners, especially on our more complete packages, is they say, I really don't do that much. Because as
Mm,
long as you have all your instructions in the system on how you want things handled, such
yeah.
as how do you want repairs handled? At what point do you want the repair coordinator to call you for approval? There's not much you have to get involved in. And then as far as boots on the ground, there's no one size fits all. So for example, with repairs, we have vendor networks. So we have our own networks of vendors. Rule of thumb is, if a 30-mile radius has over 100,000 in population, we'll be able to service it. We have the HVAC, plumbers, electricians, etc., general contractors.
Yep.
And if not, we just say, great, you bring your own contractors, you put them into the system, and then we'll call out those individuals when it's needed.
Yep. And so you can always use your own, if you have your own showing agent that you really like, if you have
Yep,
your own maintenance tech that you really like, they're the go-to person to do that repair or to do that showing or whatever it might be.
exactly. You can just toss them in there. And then we have property managers who love the platform too, because they can be tapped in to help folks when they need them. And they also can get basically a rental assistant that knows fair housing to help with everything from like a repair coordinator to a leasing coordinator to a rental assistant to help with tenant messages. And so it really helps because these virtual assistants are specifically trained in property management.
Hmm,
You yourself don't have to build that team. We'll help build that for you.
interesting. How do you navigate all the differences in state by state? There's a lot of state by state different regulations, and Minnesota is so much different
Yeah.
than Florida and Texas and so on.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there's a lot, and it continues to get worse, tenant
Yeah.
landlord law. So they
Yeah.
they never go, like, the problem with legislation out there is they never go and they never get rid of laws. If anything, they
Right.
just add more. And it's getting to the point where it's everything. How much is can you charge in pet rent? To do you have to hold the security deposit in another interest bearing account?
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of laws that you have to keep up with. There's a couple of ways we solve for that. So first, let me just talk about fair housing because that's the easiest, safest to, or the easiest one to talk about.
Sure.
With fair housing, when you're going through and putting your listing description in, and you can use our AI to write it. But all of that is based on fair housing and making sure there's no violation of great family neighborhood. That's at the federal level and then the state level as well. And we just kind of make a statement that we're going to have just in case a law changes somewhere, we're going to have the fair housing rules that we have in the most strict states to also go to those states that may not be as strict, just to make sure no one ever thinks that the
Okay.
landlord is discriminating from that perspective.
Yeah.
Um, then the other things we do as far as fair housing is we won't automatically run a background and credit check when an application comes in. And the reason for that is if you look at a lot of landlord softwares out there, they do. And the reason they do is because they make money off of it. So
Mm,
they want to run as many background and credit checks. But the second that a tenant pays and then you deny them, that's when you have fair housing violations where they say, oh, you discriminated, I qualified, and you chose someone else. This looks iffy because of my race, religion, sex, whatever it is.
sure.
And so what we'll do is we'll go through the process of making sure the application qualifies, make sure they've seen the place, confirm their move-in date, makes sense. It's not too far in the future. And assuming that they've pre-qualified and their credit is above, they've listed that their credit is above what is the
Right.
criteria for the property, certain things like that, then we'll go through and do that final step. And so I think that's been very helpful to make sure that, first one to complete everything is the one that you move forward with. And then as far as other laws, we'll put them into the system or we'll link you to the government resources and legislation for it. So we work with real estate attorneys. There's Manat is our attorneys for real estate. They are in all 50 states that they have some sort of support. And then we'll put things into the system or link you to the government website to say, here are all the rules and regulations that you need to be considering for your state, such as the security deposit being held in an interest-bearing account.
Sure. Sure. What doesn't Hemlane, what can't Hemlane handle on the property management side? That either, well, yeah, I mean, what can't it handle? What doesn't it handle?
Yeah. Good question. So there's always certain things where certain cases where we say, hey, a traditional manager is probably better for you, right? A traditional full service property manager. Some examples of that is, hey, if you want us to make all the decisions. So if you don't want to be involved with your property and you never want to hear about it,
Yep.
Hemlane is not the right solution for you.
If you want to be completely hands off, this isn't the right
Exactly.
thing.
But you don't get any surprises when you're on Hemlane. So that's
Yeah.
a first. The second is we can't provide any legal advice. So we provide all those resources. This system will tell you this pet rent is too high per, Colorado state law. So we'll link you to things. But if you call our team and say, hey, can you act as my lawyers? We can't do that.
Yeah.
And then any sort of licensed activity is always a third party. So, for example, one of our most beloved services is Eviction Shield. An Eviction Shield, whenever a tenant is past due on rent, we immediately get a mediator involved.
Yeah.
And the mediator goes through and says, qualifies the tenant to understand why they're late. Is this going to be going to court? Can we get them some sort of assistance? Is this a one-time thing? What can we do to make this situation and get the rent to the owner as soon as possible? And so with something like Eviction Shield, if you need it to go to court and a lawyer, we would recommend a lawyer in that courtroom. We ourselves wouldn't go because we're not a licensed attorney and we're also not your property manager. So there's certain things like that where we would plug in local resources for you.
Yeah. Showings. You're not doing the showings. But you could probably, I would imagine, because you said there's a lot of property management companies that
Mm-hmm.
use this. So I would imagine there's a lot of that resources available to people.
Yeah, that's showings. I'm so glad you brought that up. Showings is a really interesting one. The Department of Real Estate probably got so annoyed with me in the early days because I called them every day. And
What
I'd
can
say,
we
is
do? What
this,
can't we do?
yeah, what can we do? Is this a
Yeah.
licensed activity?
Yeah.
So one day I called the Department of Real Estate and I said, do you need a license to show a property? And the reason is actually, if you look at most property management companies, and I've worked for them, so like have gone through that process, the person showing the property is
Yeah.
not licensed. It's
Right.
some assistant in the office who hopefully is trained in fair housing, but sometimes they're not trained in fair housing, which is a big no-no in my opinion.
Yep.
So I called them and I said, hey, we're a tech company. Owners use us. They advertise their property to, over 15 listing websites, and sometimes they're not local to do the showings. Can we send out someone who's unlicensed to do the showings? And they said, no, absolutely not, because of fair housing violations. You need to be licensed to go out to do showings. And I didn't want to throw the traditional industry under the bus and say, well, they're sending out people
Yeah.
who
They're
aren't.
not licensed. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I said, okay, well, what about if we just install a lockbox or a keyless entry, like a keypad, right?
Yeah.
does that need a license? They're like, oh, no, you could do that. And I said, okay, well, what about if I have a human act like a keypad
Yeah.
where they
Just
just sit
open.
there at the door and they open and close it just like a keypad, but it's a physical human to make sure it's like locked up afterwards.
Yeah.
They were like, ah, well, that's a gray area. And I said, well,
Yeah.
there shouldn't be gray areas. You guys need to write the laws and rewrite them so there is no gray area on that. So
Good
of
luck
course,
with that.
yeah, totally. So we try to take the safest route. Like we anything that's gray, we won't do.
Yeah.
We need something where we can refer back to state law and say this is exactly, what the law says. And so with that, we basically have two options. You can use a property manager or a leasing agent who's on our platform to do the showings. That's option one. That's the most expensive. The other one, which I was totally against, and I did a 180 when I just looked at the numbers and we did it for long enough, is self-guided tours.
Yeah.
And I think most people do self-guided tours wrong. And I think if you do it right, you will avoid squatters and you will avoid any sort of security concern that you would have.
Hmm.
And that's just where you need to have a really strong process with it. And so I'm happy to go into that, but that was something that like my mind changed and said the future of showings is self-guided tours of tenants showing up, getting access to a digital lockbox or to a keypad, showing themselves around and talking to someone on the phone and then locking up afterwards.
Interesting. Yeah, I would love to hear what that is. I know a few people that do them, and they have security camera at the door where the lockbox is, so they can see that the
Yep.
that was actually locked. Or someone may one of them does a keypad, and then it just changes
Yeah.
every time. It just
Yep.
auto changes every time. And then I think the biggest one that a person that I know that does them is they charge the tenant a full month security deposit as a refundable, like it goes back to them, but that's basically upfront prior to the showing that they
How
have to
does
pay
that
that.
work out for them? If I were a tenant, I'd just go to the next place.
I would too. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I
That's
wonder
like a
how many
security
showings they
deposit.
get.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
maybe zero showings.
They get some. They definitely get some. They also do
Okay.
physical showings, but if it's like an after hours thing, that's what they're doing.
Gotcha.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, so we found tenants paying, and tenants do not want to pay. Like, are the biggest thing risk for you is bad tenant or vacancy. And so we're trying to obviously avoid both of those and
Yeah.
reduce the vacancy. And so for us, it's getting as many people who are qualified into those showings.
Yeah.
So a couple of things with self-guided tours, if listeners are thinking about it. First, never mention it's a self-guided tour on any website or listing. You
Mm,
are just asking
you're
for
asking
some
for it.
squatter
Yeah.
or someone to come in and be like, vacant property, and there's no one and eyes, like ears and eyes
Yeah.
on the ground.
Yeah.
So that's the first one that I would say is a big no-no. And you see it with all the other self-guided tour companies like the Rentleys of the world. They post it like, here's all of ours and we do 100% self-guided tours. I think
Mm.
that's why there's been so many squatters, scammers, etc., because of
Because
that.
you're not even looking for a place to rent. You're just looking for a place to squat.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
one of the big ones is scammers where they'll say, okay, this property has self-guided tours. Let me look at the schedule, and if I see a 30-minute increment that's no longer available, it means there's someone who's booked that time. Then the scammer goes to the property because the address is listed, and the person shows up for the self-guided tour and, gets the key code and goes in. And the scammer goes up and goes, oh, great. I'm so glad you're here for the tour. I'm the owner of the property. And if you
Oh.
sign today, you can get $200 off. So
Oh.
you're just asking for that. Um, so that's the first thing.
Give me a cash deposit right now.
Exactly. And so
I
I think
promise
that
it's yours.
exactly. So those scams I've heard of because we did a lot of research before going into it to understand what were all the problems, and then our questions were, how do you make sure those never happen? So that's the first thing with self-guided tours. The next one is actually getting this person's identity and doing a quick scan. So we ask when you're going through the process, and you wouldn't know which properties on Hemlane are self-guided tour or not.
Hmm.
But when you do go through the process, when you're far enough along, so you've pre-qualified and say, my income, combined income is over this, I've got credit over X, Y, and Z, like, 600. I have no evictions on my record. Once you get through that process, the next step will be, okay, great. We are going to give you convenience to see the property at any time that you want through self-guided tour. So this is farther down the process. Then what we say is, let's do a scan of your face with your ID. So you have to hold your driver's
Hmm.
license up to your face. We use biometrics to make sure that ID is the person and also the person who's booking the showing.
Yeah.
And we don't really care if the person booking the showing is your cousin and you're the one who's going to apply, because that's happened, like where someone's moving somewhere. But we need to scan that person and say this
Make
person is
sure.
legit
Yeah.
to go. And if there's anything that causes concern on the background check, someone's getting involved,
Yeah.
right? To make a
Yeah.
decision of should we move forward. So that's the next thing you have to do is you really have to make sure that you've scanned these people. You now have their ID on file should anything happen.
Yeah.
Then you have to use, to your point, some sort of keypad that changes. Ours change every 30 minutes, or digital lockbox that also changes every 30 minutes.
Yep.
The interesting thing about it is Wi-Fi, because you had mentioned some people put security cameras out front. Well, if it's an Airbnb or a vacation rental, of course it has Wi-Fi. Everyone has Wi-Fi for vacation rentals. But if it's a long-term rental,
Like,
nine
yeah.
times out of 10, you don't have Wi-Fi. And then on top of that, you're asking an owner to install Wi-Fi. So you can do that if you want cameras or the keypad. You can also use Bluetooth. Bluetooth is not ideal because they do have to download an app, like get their phone scanned up to it to change the codes
Sure.
and stuff like that, but you can. And so that's one of the things that's really interesting over time that I think will probably change. And I think with companies like Starlink, that just put really cheap Wi-Fi in the sky that will
Yep.
completely transform things, there may be much easier ways to get Wi-Fi so quickly in
Yeah.
any location and get it fast and then not. Otherwise, you can use Z-Wave or one of these other ones that comes in and gives you temporary Wi-Fi through a modem and a router.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I think the self-guided tours are interesting. My biggest challenge is people are a good can be a very good asset. So to help
Yeah.
create that sale, right? So that's always been our hesitation with relying too heavily on self-guided tours, is because if you've got a good person that knows how to sell, they can get that resident in the door quickly.
Yeah. And the other thing about it is you can do that remotely. So we have people
You're
on
right.
the phone who, during these self-guided tours, there's someone there talking to you, but then you can go at your own schedule. Someone's not having to drive out there 30 minutes, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so often, I think it's about 45% of these showings get with the tenant, when you look at what time they actually put in their keypad, like their code, it's not the time the showing is. It's 10 minutes after, it's 10 minutes before, it's shoot, I'm running 2 hours late. Can I reschedule? And so I think from that perspective, if you
Mm.
don't have to go out and you just have to be available like this and you can talk to them on the phone, there's that. And then the other thing about it is I still believe humans, to your point, we recommend, even if you're an owner using our self-guided tours or a manager, you meet with the tenant afterwards. And it might just be a Zoom call. It may be a FaceTime. It may be in person. Person's obviously the best.
Yeah.
But before you actually sign that lease, our recommendation is meet with them face to face. Someone should be meeting with them face to face.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest advantage, in my opinion, of self-guided tours is they can do it when they want,
Yeah.
and they don't. Some people just don't like interacting with people, quite frankly. But look, I don't have a showing agent on Sunday at 3:45 p.m. Like, these people can go see it on Sunday at 3:45 p.m. And maybe that might be the only time they can ever go see the apartment is Sunday at 3:45 p.m. Like,
Yep.
if you can't show me, I'm sorry. I got to find somebody else that can show me theirs. So
Yeah. And what sold me on self-guided tours and why I recommend it and I personally use it is the numbers. We looked at average days on market with agent-led tours versus self-guided tours, and hands down, self-guided tours always wins because
really,
you can get
wow.
someone in faster. It's 7 days of the week.
Yeah.
Agents, a lot of times it would be, hey, every Saturday I'll show the property, or, I'm out of town Thursday and
Yeah.
Friday. And then someone goes and sees the self-guided tour place. You have someone on the phone. Great. When are you going to submit your application? Great. I'll be on the lookout for it tomorrow. And then the next day, really go in and make sure they did it. And then before you know it, they've already signed a lease and they haven't seen any other properties.
It's funny you said that, because so we were trying to rent a place for a remote worker, and so we wanted to send somebody to a city that we've got some properties on, but they would just be there, here and there. And so, anyways, we're trying to look for this a place for them, and we can never meet with the you know property owner or showing agent
Yeah.
because their timing doesn't work out. And so it's like we had probably four different places. We could never figure out a time to meet because we can't coordinate our schedule with theirs. And so it was the one place that could actually meet with us at the right time that we ended up renting.
Yeah.
It wasn't because it was the best place. I mean, maybe it was, but it wasn't because of that. It was because they're the only ones that could actually show us the place. But if all those people had remote, showings and able to do it virtually, we would have been able to see all of them.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
What is going on in the market, in the industry? I mean, it's there's a lot happening that's changing. I feel like rental housing is changing rapidly. What are you seeing with your property owners and with Hemlane?
Yeah. So the first one, which I knew we touched upon, was regulations.
Yeah.
I think that it's becoming more and more challenging to be an owner or a property manager. So that's the first one. And I don't
Especially
foresee
doing it
that
by yourself.
changing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second one that I see is the convenience culture and its impact on tenant experience and tenant expectations. And what I mean by that is we all have Amazon now. We get things delivered in 2 days. We expect Instacart to deliver groceries right away. And we expect this immediacy with everything.
Yeah.
And so with tenants, what you will see is everything is an emergency with
Yeah.
repairs. They're expecting when their maintenance request is put in to talk to someone right away.
Yeah.
And that can get really, really exhausting for a property manager and also for owners. I spoke with a property manager yesterday, someone moving over to Hemlane who said, I hate having to work 7 days of the week. I am
Mm.
totally burnt out because I am around the clock. And we hear that just so often, this whole around the clock, don't have any time, etc.
Yeah.
From managers and owners, especially as you get older, or the surprises of like, hey, Sunday, I wasn't planning to call
Yeah.
12
I
plumbers.
think that's the biggest thing. It's not even that they're working 24/7. It's that
Have to be
they
available. Yeah.
potentially are working, at
Yeah.
whatever time of the day, and it's not convenient. I know for me, like if I got my focus time and I'm going to focus on something and somebody's interrupting me constantly, it feels like you get nothing done. You're irritated. And even
Hmm.
so, if you're focus time with your family or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you got a tenant that's needing you right now, that is really irritating. And that's what burns you out very quickly.
Exactly. Just the thought of having your phone on when you're
Yeah.
at the dinner table,
Yeah.
when
I
you
have to have
just
this on.
want. Exactly. And so I think that convenience culture we've really tapped into helping and saying, how do you reinvent property management?
Mm.
How do we have people who are 24/7? They're not really, they have their set hours. You
Yeah.
have a dedicated repair coordinator, but on the weekends or, in the middle of the night, someone else may pick it up because we always have someone there for you. But then
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about being 24/7. Everything is just taken care of and you get a summary. And then based on your instructions, you can be as involved as you want. If you say my repair threshold is $150, anything over $150, give me a call. We will. You'll just get more calls than someone who might put that at 350.
Makes sense. What what size property owner is your ideal customer? Like, well,
Yeah,
how many units?
it's usually 2 through 50.
Okay.
We find that if you've won, it might be accidental and
Yeah.
you may not, and we take one, don't get me wrong. We take all property sizes. But it's usually between that like 1 to 50. What's really interesting is a lot of our early customers started with 20 rentals.
Hmm.
Now they're at 300. And
Hmm.
so what we've started to do with those, because we go up to 500 units, and we can, or I guess 1,000 plus we can go up to. There's no limit. But what we've tried to do with it, and it's an interesting kind of design question, is how do you make it like Excel, where it's really easy to do 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
But then if you're a financial analyst, you need to do regression modeling, something like that. You could do it through Excel, right?
Yeah.
And so Excel is kind of built for everyone. The big guys who are really power users, as well as the small person who might be intimidated by things.
Yeah.
And so with that, we try to think of Hemlane very similarly of how do you have, we have these settings buttons where you can do rent allocations and owner distributions if it's a syndicate. You can go
Hmm.
ahead and tap into customizing your GL categories. You can go ahead and change your settings for advertising your property.
Hmm.
But that's all power user moves, and majority of people never click that setting
Yeah.
button. And so that's kind of how we've gotten around and been able to grow and scale with our customers.
That's cool. That's great. Okay. Couple last questions. We're going to shift gears a little bit. What's a mistake that you've made and how have you learned from it?
Yeah. I always, I try to educate myself a lot. I'm a huge reader. I'm a huge podcaster. I listen, obviously, to your show a lot. And I'm always trying to educate myself. And sometimes the best education is you making a mistake, right?
Yeah.
And so
Unfortunately.
yes, one of the mistakes that I made was in a recent property purchase where I learned a lot of lessons from it. It was a new development, and they said it will be done in 6 months. Go ahead and just put your deposit in. And this developer had done a lot of build to rent. And so put deposits in.
Yeah.
And then 3 years later, the property was still not built. You go, it's just a lot.
Oh,
They had variable rate loans. Of course, interest rates were going up for me as well. And so suddenly the property was not as good of an investment slash never was built. The developer was underwater, had too many properties and had variable interest rate. And then suddenly when interest rates skyrocketed, had this huge debt and
yeah.
couldn't actually finance the projects. And so what I learned from that is like one, when you start out, you should do it all yourself, right? And then two, you need to control things like that. So when you're looking at your pro forma and saying, does this look like a good investment? There might be one that might be slightly less cash flow. But you look at it and you say, okay, but it's right now. I'm locked in on this interest rate.
Yep.
I know you're locked
Yep.
in on the purchase price. I was locked in on the purchase price, but you're locked in on this interest rate. And this is probably a better decision. And I think I just got really greedy of being like, well, this is the best cash flow of all of
Yeah.
them. And then that
This is an
happened.
exciting
So,
opportunity, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to get caught with that. This is the exciting one. This is the best one. And I've done the same thing with rentals. And most of it has been like, it's in a terrible neighborhood or something like that. But I look at the cash flow and I'm like, this is the best cash
This is
flow. I'm
great.
going to buy this one. I'm not going to
Yeah.
buy, this other one over here. Yeah. It's a better neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not going to buy that one because I'm only going to cash flow $300 a month. This one's going to cash flow 600, like double. Why wouldn't I go with that? And then reality happens, right? And I end up cash flowing nothing, and then it doesn't appreciate, and then you're like,
Yep.
what the heck? What's going on? That's the one where you do get the call, and you're like, no, don't call me. I don't.
Exactly. Exactly.
uh, Love it. What's a favorite book you can recommend?
Favorite book I can recommend. I've got a lot of them. Too many to count. Can I give you two?
Absolutely.
Two from this year. One is 4,000 Weeks.
Hmm.
Do you know what 4,000 Weeks is?
I don't know. Is that how many weeks the average person lives?
Yes,
Cool.
exactly.
There you go.
And so really it talks about it says it's about time management. The book has nothing to do about time management. I don't know why they put that on the front cover. It's more just reflecting on your life and how you spend it, and a lot of this about immediacy and technology and some of those negative impacts that it has
Yeah.
on humans and how to balance all of that. So that's the first one. The second one is a business book. The company I keep by Leonard Lauder. So it's about the Estee Lauder building that business. And what I love about it is like literally they would like go to the bank because they need an extra $10,000 and then just bootstrapping it to
Yeah.
be as big as it is. So yeah.
I love those books that tell you, just that story of the grind and like the bootstrapping.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite ones that my kids have actually listened to is Shoe Dog, Phil Knight's book.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
just,
It's a
he
great
just
one.
gets beat up after like, just like, oh my gosh, how many people would have quit? And most people would have,
Exactly.
way before, and never would have, nobody would have known about it. Nobody would know about Nike. Nike wouldn't have been anything. So, last question. What are your three pillars of wealth creation?
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to go with the standard ones. The first one I'm going to say is my husband. They always say 50% of your success is who you marry. And so I think really being aligned financially on what we spend money on, and then having someone who is also very similarly conservative
Yeah.
in how they save, how they plan. I think that's incredibly important. So that's my first one. My second one is frugality in the most delightful way. I am the type of person who spends very little. And when I spend money, I basically make sure it's something I'm going to have all the time. You will see that in everything from my wardrobe to everything at work. Like we know every software that we're using, every subscription we're paying for, just really making sure always to have expenses in line and never live outside of my means. I think it's really easy to say, like, great, I'll buy this house and yeah, majority of my salary is going to it, but instead being able to save and set money aside and say, you know what, I'm going to save this money instead and invest it in other homes and real estate and assets. So that's my second one. My third one is going to be education. And I don't think it's traditional education. I obviously have way too many degrees. I have four degrees, two undergrad degrees, and then two master's degrees.
Wow.
But it's not that. I think the best education actually comes from work, doing the work.
Yeah,
I
for sure.
interned my entire time when I was in college. I also am huge on learning from work and the people you work with, bringing really bright minds in. So I think it's that type of education.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. Like people, I think this is the vast majority of people. Like they're going to college to become, whatever you name it, but their job to put them through college is bartending or something just totally unrelated. They're never learning by experience at all.
Yeah.
They're just learning through a book. And my dad was a manufacturer, worked for a manufacturing company, and there's a college, that the college that I went to is called Wisconsin Stout, and it's a very hands-on college. Like a lot of the learning is actually learning through doing. And then there's MIT. Most people
Hmm.
know MIT.
Yep.
MIT is not a college that does it by doing. It's all books. And he said we would get an MIT grad and we'd get a Stout grad, and Stout is, nobody knows it. Like unless you're from
Yeah.
around here, like you don't know it. they would hire the Stout grad every time. They'd
Yeah.
look at the Stout grad, they'd look at the MIT grad, they'd throw the MIT grad in the trash and hire the Stout grad because they knew that person has had hands-on experience. They know it, they've done it. And that's the education that you need for sure.
Exactly. Our best team members at Hemlane have no pedigree,
Yeah.
no college or anything. And even their thought process, they're always finding ways to educate themselves.
Mm,
And so I would say the same thing that the pedigree doesn't matter. If you kind of look at our team, you're like, wait, there's no one here has a pedigree, but they always outperform anyone who does.
yeah. Yeah. I love that. Well, Dana, really appreciate your time and taking us through Hemlane and what you guys are doing. It's exciting what you're doing. You know, think it's fantastic for the industry. I love that you created something that a lot of people would think, well, it's already there, but you just created around this little niche that nobody was playing in and created really filled a big gap in the market. So I really love that you created something like that. And thanks for serving people.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And thanks for having me on the show today.
Last question though. How can our
Yeah.
listeners get in touch with you? Learn more about
Yeah.
Hemlane and what you got going on.
Yeah, I love talking to other real estate investors. So you can reach me at dana@hemlane.com. You can also go to hemlane.com, HEMLANE.com. But if you have any specific questions about property management, real estate investing, always like to stay in touch. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Dana, again, really appreciate you and you have a fantastic rest of the day.
Great. Thanks. You too.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I appreciate you being a loyal listener. I would love to have you go on to our Facebook page and subscribe, give us a thumbs up, go on to iTunes or wherever you listen and give us a rating and review. Don't forget to subscribe. Your rating and review just helps us push this out to more and more people and continue to grow our audience and hopefully positively affect a ton of people out there that really need this and want this. So the other thing I've got for you is a free ebook on my website. So go on to venturedproperties.com, and download our free ebook on real estate and on syndication. And I've got some data points in there, some really good stuff for you. So I'd love to have you take a look at that. It's free. I'm not expecting anything from it. And also, look, if you want some help in multifamily, want some help learning, growing, getting your business off the ground, I would love to talk to you about what it would look like to work with me potentially and see if that's a good fit. So you can go to coachwithdex.com and check that out. And we can definitely have a call. Thanks a lot for listening. You make it a fantastic rest of the day. I'll catch you on the next episode.